Hello everybody, Maven here, and safe to say Solar Titan ain't what it used to be. There were some huge shakeups this season that turned it on its side. So throwing hammers got a huge nerf, and mods in general got a huge nerf, and Synthoceps, which were the main exotic you would use on Solar Titan, also got a nerf. And there were some other exotics that got reworks and got buffed. So now we're left with the question, what is the best exotic to use on Solar Titan now? So we're going to do some testing and figure that out in today's video. So after the throwing hammer nerf, when you pick up a hammer off the floor, you don't get the charge back instantly. You get it over the course of 1.4 seconds, which really kills its spammability, which really hurts the Synthoceps, which also got a nerf. So it's down from 200% damage to 165% damage, which is not the biggest deal in the world. That's still very good. But since you can't spam the hammers as much, it kind of hurts. Hold up, Maven from present day here to tell you to ignore the Synthoceps. That intro was recorded a couple weeks ago, and we now know how crazy the Wormgod Caress is, so that will definitely be taking the Synthoceps' place for this video because it's just better. Okay, back to the video. Next is the Loreley Splendor Helm. This thing got untouched. It's still what it always was, so it should still be decent. And then the Precious Scars got a rework, so now when you get a kill with a weapon matching the element of your subclass, you get granted restoration for 3 seconds, which you can then use this restoration to extend with Ember of Empyrean. So it could be very good for survivability. And then finally we got the Severance Enclosure. The explosions that it creates are now going to be bigger and stronger, and kills with this explosion will create another explosion, so you can sort of chain reaction them, kind of like impetus from the Sunshot. With all of this being said, let's do some testing. Don't forget to drop a like because it really helps out a ton. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy. So for the ad clear test, we're going to head to the Hydroponics Delta, and it's time for that good old mandatory reasoning I always give. So here is a Sunshot body shot against the Legionary in the Root of Nightmares raid, and here is a Sunshot body shot against the Legionary in Hydroponics Delta. Ads in Hydroponics Delta are twice as tanky as raid ads, so it's a great place to test endgame weapons and builds. Now with that being said, let's begin the testing. So let's start with the Precious Scars. So in this instance, final blows with solar weapons grant us 3 seconds of restoration, or 5 seconds if we have Ember of Solace. This is an incredible exotic to pair along with either the Sunshot or the Vex Mytho class, especially with some of the artifact mods this season, such as Flint Striker that makes you radiant after a few precision hits, and Razor Precision, where your precision final blows with solar weapons cause solar ignitions while you're radiant, and the synergy there is crazy. There's also Revitalizing Blast that can allow you to weaken champions when you bonk them. This is just the ultimate Solar Titan exotic for those who don't feel like bonking. If you prefer gunplay, this is the exotic for you, and it's especially good this season for the artifact mods. I would say it's the second best Solar Titan exotic for survivability in endgame content, like legend level or higher. I would still put the Loreley Splendor Helm ahead of it because it's not relying on you getting a kill for you to get restoration. It relies on you getting your shields broken, which I feel may be an easier thing to have happen in more scenarios than being able to get a solar weapon kill in a Grandmaster, because those enemies can be pretty tanky. Although I can see Precious Scars being very solid in a Grandmaster when you play range with something like a Polaris Lance or any other long-range solar weapon, and there's honestly an argument for that, because you could argue Loreley is less versatile because you need a barricade charge up, which is not too hard with Ember of Singeing, but I digress. Precious Scars did a great job with the ad clear without bonking much at all, and being able to utilize this season's artifact mods. Now let's move on to, of course, Loreley. We kind of already just talked about it, but still. Ember of Singeing allows you to get your barricade charge back extremely fast when Roaring Flames is active. You punch and bonk stuff to proc Singeing and Focusing Strike on your gloves, and the barricade is pretty much back in seconds. It's a robust exotic. I feel like that's the best way to describe it. It's very robust, but it's also very limited. Applying restoration when your shields break is all it really does. It's built to keep you alive, and that's a great thing, but it kind of leaves me wanting more. But I always say this in build videos, the key to a great PvE build is survivability. That is the #1 priority, and Solar Titan in general very much shines to the point where Loreley may be a little bit overkill, but you still can't go wrong with more healing. You know, the more the merrier. It's always been my go-to Solar Titan exotic whenever I'm doing content where I absolutely need to survive. So if you're not amazing at Destiny 2, this might be the Solar Titan exotic you want to use, because if there's one thing it's good at, it's babysitting your health bar. As for the ad clear potential, it's as stock bonk gets. There's nothing more than vanilla Solar Titan bonk, nothing special, so there's no way I can really rate it. So let's move on to the Severance Enclosure. Now, quick shameless plug, I did a full build breakdown video on the Severance Enclosure last week, and I encourage you to go check it out. I'll link it in the description and in the card up above. Honestly, I should have made this video before making that one, but here we are. So I preached it before, and I'll preach it again, but I firmly believe this to be one of the best Titan exotics in the game, and one of the best ad clear exotics in the entire game after the buff it received. And you can see in the gameplay that all the ads I had to run around killing with Precious Scars or Loreley are suddenly just all dead with the Severance Enclosure without me even having to think about it, because the radius of the explosions are massive and they chain as well. And the way we're able to have infinite charged melees to proc the Severance Explosion perk is that when you have Roaring Flames active, it counts your uncharged punches as charged melees because it fuses them with solar power. Therefore, all these punch kills cause these crazy big explosions. It just takes so much pressure off the ad clearing job. You kill one ad and suddenly everything in a 15-meter radius is just dead. And another thing you can see in the gameplay is that if an ad survives the explosion, they get yeeted into the air for some reason. I don't know why. So therefore, they can't attack you. And the explosions help soften up bigger targets as well, so it's also decent for damage output. So I know Precious Scars and Loreley are exotics literally meant for survival, but between the insane ad clear and yeeting of the Severance Enclosure, I would say it's the best Solar Titan survivability exotic in the ad clear department. And finally, let's get to the Wormgod Caress. This exotic has swiftly rose to the top of usage for Titan, and for good reason. It's ridiculously strong. So as you can see, solar melee kills fill the meter on the left side of the screen. This meter is split into 5 stacks of the Burning Fist buff. I will put the damage values of each stack on the screen now. So the Synthoceps got nerfed, so now you only get a 175% melee damage buff when surrounded. And the Wormgod basically gets that amount of damage in just 3 stacks, and it's arguably easier to proc, and has a damage ceiling of 275%. It's mental. And that's not even counting Roaring Flames times 3 on top of that. It's an absolute night and day difference when it comes to the damage output between this exotic and the other 3. So for bonking, I would say it's far better than Loreley and Precious Scars, simply because it deletes things. But surprisingly enough, I would still say Severance Enclosure is still better for survival in ad clear scenarios, just from the sheer ad clearing capabilities. But for damage output, we're going to do a side-by-side comparison with Wormgod versus everything else against Charles, and it's not even close. Wormgod easily wins. Now, regular bonk builds without Wormgod or Synthos aren't weak, to be clear. The damage potential is still there, it's just not to the degree of Wormgod. I've tested many things against Charles, and I can tell you, without Wormgod, you're still doing decent damage, just, not Wormgod level. And with that, we're jumping right into the next test in a solo Legend Lost sector with the bonk build. And since the season is fresh, I am a little bit underleveled because of losing the artifact light levels. So this is basically master equivalent. So starting with the Severance Enclosure, and I did eliminate Loreley and Precious Scars, and by the way, I did test them. And it's because they didn't really fit the bonk theme very well. When it came to that clustered ad clear and you have 15 ads shooting you at the same time, even with restoration, you get destroyed. Those exotics are much better for staying back at a distance with the ranged solar weapon, not as much for bonk in tough content. With the Severance Enclosure pinballing all the ads around, it was much easier to get around with the bonk build in this difficulty of content. However, where the Severance Enclosure fails is around champions and bosses. They are so tanky, and unlike the Wormgod, we don't have any kind of extra damage buff to help bonk them down quickly enough, so they kind of wreck our face if we aren't careful. So I wouldn't use Severance Enclosure anywhere past Legend difficulty, but as for Legend and below, I would say it's the best Solar Titan exotic in the game in my opinion. So now let's move on to the Wormgod, and straight away the damage difference is immense. Nothing survives a bonk or even a normal punch, and we just melt through those champions a lot quicker in just a couple punches, and of course we are using a 1-2 punch shotgun. So the Wormgod is quite contrary to the Severance Enclosure. It shines more against the chunkier targets, but falls flat around the heavy ad clear, so completely opposite to the Severance Enclosure. And it encounters the same problem as the Loreley and the Precious Scars. When you have 15 ads shooting you at the same time, it doesn't matter if your punches one-shot them because they will overwhelm and outnumber you before you can punch them all. The Severance Enclosure, on the other hand, collats entire areas. So depending on the activity and the balance between ads and champs, I think that can determine which exotic you want to use between Wormgod and Severance. Now, I apologize I didn't do a Grandmaster test with all these exotics because Grandmasters just aren't available yet in the season, so we can't physically do that. But if I had to take a guess as to which exotic would be the best in that kind of content, surprisingly, I would guess Loreley Splendor would be the best. So the thing is, you don't really want to play bonk in Grandmaster content. You typically want to keep your distance and use your guns. And with the Precious Scars relying on a kill for restoration and the Loreley relying on a barricade charge, you be the judge as to which one would be better. Let me know what you think in the comments. Personally, I feel the Loreley would be better. It can definitely save your butt in some hectic situations, which is why I used it when I flawless Crota's End. So on to the final conclusion here. Severance is the best for content with lots of ads. Wormgod is the best for content with lots of yellow bars or champs. Loreley is the best for Grandmasters. That is my verdict, that is my opinion. If you have any objections, feel free to discuss in the comments. Also, just leave a comment anyway, because it really helps the algorithm and I would greatly appreciate it. And if you enjoyed, be sure to hit the like button as well. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. I'm on the road to my goal of 50K for 2024, and I hope you can stick around for more. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.